Tonight, on the eve of an election call.
We're going to have an election that matters like probably no other we've seen in recent memory.
The Prime Minister set to call a federal election in just hours. How party leaders will pitch their message to voters in a consequential campaign. Elbows up, how this viral rallying cry is bringing Canadians together under one banner.
This is a really important moment in Canada's history.
Respect! Respect! Respect!
Plus, cross-border protest. What has Americans in one city waving the maple leaf in support of their northern neighbors? And the prehistoric find that has collectors smiling.
This is a set of 6 megalodon teeth.
How big of a bite these ancient shark teeth up for auction could take out of someone's bank account.
CTV National News with Heather Butts. Reporting tonight, Marcia McMillan.
Good evening. Prime Minister Mark Carney is expected to call a snap election Sunday, launching a spring campaign the shortest possible under Canadian law. CTV learning that Canadians will head to the polls April 28th to cast their vote. We're also learning where the Prime Minister will be running to try and gain a seat, taking on the riding of Nepean outside of Ottawa. Mark Carney and the other party leaders all already positioning themselves to be the choice as Prime Minister in a tightened race dominated by one key issue: who is best to stand up for Canada? CTV's Jeremy Sharon reports.
When Prime Minister Mark Carney returns to Rideau Hall Sunday, just days after being sworn in, this time it'll be to launch an election campaign that will send Canadians to the polls. Sources tell CTV News voting day will be April 28th, which means a 37-day election campaign, the shortest possible under Elections Canada rules.
They've made the calculation that a shorter campaign would be in their interest because Carney is enjoying this bump now, having just been sworn in as Prime Minister, and they want to make that last.
A short campaign that will officially kick off tomorrow, but feels like it's already underway. The Liberals today announced they're making the federal dental care program available to millions more Canadians, expanding eligibility.
This is because New Democrats fought for it. But the threat in front of us is that Mark Carney has said he's promised deep cuts to the operating budget. Now, with Pierre Poilievre, he's been very clear. He would cut dental care.
While Pierre Poilievre this morning,
way to go, guys. Thank you very much,
made campaign-style stops at Ottawa businesses, meeting with supporters.
He fixes watches, which means that he knows that it's time for a change.
That's what the Conservatives are pitching, but the election comes at a time when the biggest change has been in the polls, with the Liberals closing a gap that had lasted for months, landing in a statistical tie with the Conservatives.
Now we've got this absolute horse race of an election where the Liberals look like they were dead, gone, and buried. And now it's anyone's guess who will win this election.
An election which polls also indicate will be focused on a single issue.
Trump still transfixes Canadians as the top national issue of concern.
We're going to have an election that matters like probably no other we've seen in recent memory.
And that's because it comes amid a trade war and threats to our sovereignty from U.S. President Donald Trump, who candidates will be looking to show they can handle best to win this election. Marcia?
Thanks, Jeremy. And a programming note, you can watch our special coverage of the election call on Sunday, hosted by Chief Anchor and Senior Editor Omar Sachedina and CTV News Chief Political Correspondent Vashi Capello, starting at 11 a.m. on CTV News Channel and ctvnews.ca. The pushback against U.S. President Donald Trump's tariff and annexation threats materialized in a massive rally in Toronto today. Elbows Up Canada is meant to show national pride. And while most protests have been peaceful, as Kamal Karmali shows us, some have turned aggressive.
National pride and unity on full display From the hundreds of people here at this Toronto rally, each one of them with a story on why it was important to be here today. There's the immigrant from Afghanistan.
So as a Canadian immigrant, I'm so proud to be here to support Canada.
The LA-based comedian who moved back home.
Now we are looking to make Nova Scotia our home.
And the dog dad from Niagara Falls, a border city whose economy has been hit hard.
Show America that we're a sovereign nation.
Now, national pride isn't the only thing being shared at this rally. People are also handing out these.
Here you go.
Thank you so much. Pins of the Maple Leaf. The rally called Elbows Up Canada began when Canadian comedian Mike Myers did this on TV, a hockey term meaning to defend yourself and get ready for a fight, in response to U.S. President Donald Trump's tariffs on Canadian goods and pushing for Canada to become a 51st state. Ottawa hosting the first Elbows Up rally on Parliament Hill earlier this month. And in another show of solidarity today, the city of Toronto put up these Love Local signs to encourage buying local, while Ottawa launched an ad campaign against tariffs along key U.S. highways in red states. Rallies also being held at Tesla dealerships across the country, including this one today in Vancouver and in Kitchener, protesting the car manufacturer's CEO, Elon Musk, who has close ties with Trump. But some have taken it to the next gear, vandalizing vehicles, even lighting them on fire. In Vancouver, police have seen 8 attacks on Tesla dealerships since the new year.
Violence is not the Canadian way.
Back at the rally in Toronto, a more peaceful way to vocalize opposition in hopes their voices will be carried all the way to the White House. Kamal Karomali, CTV News, Toronto.
Canada has updated its travel warning for Canadians looking to visit the U.S. for an extended period of time. Ottawa now warning Canadians visiting the U.S. that anyone staying for longer than 30 days must be registered with the United States government, and that failure to do so could result in penalties, fines, and misdemeanor prosecution. Some European countries are also issuing similar travel advisories for their citizens. Tensions with the U.S. also causing some Americans to voice their displeasure with Donald Trump and his policies today. They joined their Canadian counterparts in a one-of-a-kind dual-country protest. CTV's Sandra Maru shows us how it unfolded.
A passionate plea motivated by patriotism. Hundreds of Canadians lining Windsor's riverfront, facing the Detroit skyline.
Trump is not making America great. He's making America hate. We love Americans. Dump Trump.
It's a message not just about politics, however, but about relationships. Many here say they admire their American neighbors, but they're frustrated by the man leading them.
It's not the American people that we have trouble with, it's Mr. Trump. So we just want to show the Americans that we're as patriotic as they are, and we love you as much as you love us. And, you know, let's get this nonsense over with.
For months, tensions between Canada and the U.S. have been growing, driven by President Donald Trump's threats of tariffs and even his suggestion that Canada should become America's 51st state. That's pushed some Canadians to quietly cut back on cross-border trips, a subtle form of protest by keeping their dollars at home. This reaction, however, much louder.
Other than our buying power and not traveling to the States, how much can we do? So being able to come down here really makes us feel like we're doing something.
Ironically, this cross-border protest was not started by anyone in Windsor, but by a Michigan resident, someone who believes the Canada-U.S. border should not divide people, it should connect them.
We thought that, coming together was a strong message to send, to show the White House that we really want to go back to what things used to be.
On Windsor's side, signs, speeches, and chants. On Detroit's side, a similar scene with American supporters even waving Canadian flags, a symbol that they too reject Trump's rhetoric. And a few other Canadians I spoke with tell me they do credit U.S. President Donald Trump for one thing, and that is uniting Canadians of all political beliefs in a way which perhaps could not have been possible if these tariff threats were not a factor. But the key messages, at least from Canadians at this cross-border protest, are clear. put the tariff talk aside, stop threatening to make Canada the 51st U.S. state, and show the Trump government that Canadians will not take his rhetoric lying down. In Windsor, Sanjay Maru, CTV News.
Concern continues to grow in the wake of news this week that China executed 4 Canadians. China says the executions were for drug-related crimes and ignored the federal government's plea for leniency. CTV's Judy Trin spoke to human rights groups about their concerns.
Human rights groups say there are 100 Canadians detained in China's prisons. Earlier this year, 4 were executed. Beijing said it was punishment for drug-related crimes. Canada's plea for leniency failed.
I got involved personally to try to prevent these executions. It's happened in the past, and Canada is not targeted. There are many other countries that are of dual nationals.
One of the most urgent cases involves Robert Schellenberg on China's death row. He was arrested in 2014, accused of smuggling more than 200 kilograms of methamphetamine. Schellenberg was granted an appeal, but still sentenced to death after a one-day trial.
It is depressing. It is frustration.
Human rights advocates say the Canadian government needs to be more transparent about who is being detained by China.
We should be transparent in providing the accurate information about how many Canadians are currently in Chinese jail.
There are also concerns about Hussein Jalil, a Canadian and Uyghur human rights activist that China labeled a terrorist. He was arrested in 2006 while traveling in Uzbekistan to visit his wife's family. China has an extradition agreement with that country, and the Uzbeks deported him. After his arrest, his mother told CTV News he was tortured.
They forced him to sign a confession, or he would be put in a hole.
Because Jalil was born in Shenzhen, the Chinese have refused to recognize his Canadian citizenship, just like the 4 individuals executed this year.
Canada's ability to protect and speak out and assert protection over Canadians who are in trouble abroad is of paramount importance.
Successive prime ministers have tried to bring Jalil home. He and his wife have 4 children. The youngest was born after his imprisonment.
His family are inspirational, and they ought to be reunited.
Next week marks 19 years since Hussein Jalil was jailed. His family have not received any updates about him since 2016. But his lawyer says as long as Jalil is alive, they will have hope the Canadian government will be able to bring him home. Judy Trin, CTV News, Ottawa.
Police in New Mexico are searching for suspects after a shootout left 3 people dead and 15 injured. The gunfight broke out between 2 groups of people at a park north of El Paso.
We know that there was some type of ill will between these groups prior to last night. So they had some issues before, and it escalated last night.
Police say about 200 people were in the park in the city of Las Cruces when the shooting began. The dead include 2 19-year-olds and a 16-year-old boy. Dramatic moments in Istanbul today where police used pepper spray and tear gas to disperse a massive crowd of protesters. The demonstrators had gathered to challenge the detention of Istanbul's mayor. Pope Francis is set to be released from hospital on Sunday. The 88-year-old pontiff will also make his first public appearance tomorrow since being hospitalized on February 14th. Doctors caution that Francis will still require at least 2 months of rest and rehabilitation. Famous landmarks around the world turned off the lights today in honor of Earth Hour. The annual event began in 2007 as a way to draw attention to the climate crisis. Since then, over 190 countries and territories have taken part. Among the landmarks to go dark temporarily, Sydney's Waterfront Opera House, London's Millennium Wheel, and the Parthenon in Greece. Coming up, taking Made in Canada to a new level.
We're ecstatic about it. We've been working hard to get this off the ground.
How a new endeavor could revolutionize Canadian manufacturing. Plus, why a Quebec man is calling on his province to step up and help his cancer fight. Amid the growing trade tensions, an Ontario company is on a mission to bring more food processing back home. It wants to build the country's first full-scale processing plant to make soy protein. As CTV's John Venevalley-Rouse shows us, there's growing interest in the project.
When it comes to using soybeans like these as a food ingredient for things like protein bars, shakes, and veggie burgers, they have to be processed first into a fine powdery substance that you can see on the list of ingredients called soy protein isolate.
It's one of those ingredients where when you start looking for it in the back of the pack, you realize it's all over the place.
But while Canadians consume thousands of tons of this protein every year, you may be surprised to learn none of it is produced in Canada. While farmers here grow and harvest plenty of soybeans, there's nowhere in the country that can process them into that powder. Instead, the raw beans are shipped to China or processed in America, then sold to us.
We don't necessarily have to produce everything ourselves here in Canada, but surely critical food ingredients like soy protein, we ought to be making here at home.
The trade war has served to highlight that fact.
Each of these machines has a different duty.
And it's something farmer Martin Vanderloo has been trying to address for years. We met him at a first-of-its-kind demonstration facility his company built that uses these machines to turn soybeans into that protein powder in a new chemical-free way, and here in Canada.
We're ecstatic about it. We've been working hard to get this off the ground.
This is what he's aiming to build, a full-scale processing plant in Sarnia, Ontario, big enough to make all the soy protein Canada needs, with plenty left over for export to other countries, employing more than 100 people. And farmers sure love the idea of more value-added processing at home.
Be delighted to see more of that.
Vanderloo says the tariff threats should be a long-needed wake-up call for more domestic processing, noting his own experience has been frustrating. While there's been plenty of support for the plant, the major challenge has been securing the funding. Vanderloo says he's almost there, but thinks they should be getting more help from Ottawa. Instead, left feeling its priorities lie elsewhere.
The interest from government is more along the lines of EV batteries, as an example, and minerals, as opposed to agriculture and food production here in this country.
But amid the sudden patriotic fervor,
this is the tower that holds the spray dryer.
Vanderloo is fielding more calls, some wondering how soon he can start producing. Alas, it'll still take 3 years to build this plant, at which point soy protein will finally be a product made in Canada. John Venevalley-Rouse, CTV News, Ben Miller, Ontario.
Still ahead, frustrated but fighting. Why brain cancer patients and their doctors in Quebec want the province to fund a promising new treatment. In Quebec, hope for a new brain cancer treatment is being dashed by the high cost of the therapy. Patients are calling on the province to pay for it, but so far they're refusing. CTV's Angela McKenzie reports.
In the face of an uncertain future, Mathieu Bolduc strives to keep his days as normal as possible. 1 year ago, he was an active 27-year-old, and then everything changed.
I was bouldering with my buddies from work. I felt suddenly really dizzy, couldn't really get my balance right, couldn't really walk properly, and had a lot of trouble talking.
His symptoms worsened overnight. Bolduc ended up in the hospital.
They tell me it was a brain hemorrhage caused by my grade 4 tumor. Basically, my life completely tumbled overnight.
The devastating diagnosis was glioblastoma, a rare cancer. Bolduc underwent brain surgery, radiation, and chemo. His medical team also recommended a new treatment that has shown promising results. Novocure's Optune is a device worn on the head for most of the day, ideally for 2 years. It uses electrical fields to attack cancer cells. Dr. David Roberge is one of the physicians who studied Optune's effectiveness.
Of the hundreds of patients on the trial, the ones that had the treatment lived longer on average
than the ones that didn't have the treatment.
He says the survival rate 5 years after diagnosis more than doubled with the device, adding it's the only new treatment for glioblastoma that has shown positive results in roughly 20 years. Problem is, it costs up to $27,000 a month, and so far the province has refused to cover it.
I mean, it made me feel hopeful until I realized that I couldn't afford it.
A situation that frustrates cancer doctors like Roberge.
If I don't tell you about it, I'm not doing my job. But if I tell you about it and then you feel like you have to mortgage your house and maybe get it, or you can't get it and you live with the frustration of knowing there's something out there that you can't get, that puts people in a difficult situation.
Optune was approved by Health Canada in 2022. Quebec's Health Institute evaluated the treatment in 2023, but did not recommend coverage, in part because of the high cost. We reached out to the Health Ministry, but it did not respond by our deadline. Bolduc also wants Quebec to cover Optune, but he isn't waiting. His family members are pooling their savings and more than $50,000 they crowdsourced to pay for it.
People don't have a choice, right? It's either you take it or you're going to die within 2 years.
And while he can only afford a few months, he hopes it will buy him more years with those he loves. Angela McKenzie, CTV News.
Still ahead, from the ocean floor to the auction block. How much bidders could shell out for a rare set of prehistoric teeth? Even for the tooth fairy, it would be a tough question to answer. What's a 3-million-year-old shark tooth worth? As CTV's Sarah Plowman reports, a New Brunswick collector is about to find out.
Perched on the sea, it's not hard to find maritime treasures here. Scenes of sailing or village life captured by Maud Lewis. But this auction house's focus has turned sharper.
This is a set of 6 megalodon teeth.
Chompers of a massive ancient shark that dominated the ocean more than 3.5 million years ago. Found off North Carolina, they'll fetch for a few $100s a piece or more.
There will be kind of jockeying and bidding for the next couple of weeks, but then really when it comes down to it, it'll be like the last day is when we'll really see some traction.
The fossils vary in shape and style, some natural, others more polished. All belong to a collector from northern New Brunswick.
He probably has the largest collection like this in Atlantic Canada or potentially in Canada. We're always so amazed at the caliber and then the breadth of collections within Atlantic Canada.
More familiar with paintings than prongs, these teeth have widened the siblings' range.
We had to learn a lot about just the species itself, how the items are categorized, how they're valued, what collectors look for when they're looking at a tooth, even how to properly measure the items.
The last chance to bite at this bid is March 30th. Sarah Plowman, CTV News, Fredericton.
For all of us at CTV National News, thank you for watching. Good night and see you tomorrow.
CTV National News, Canada's #1 newscast.